In this video, we're going to go over some terms that help introduce us to plot. So the first thing we're going to start with is a set of related terms that basically identify and describe individual elements of the plot and show how those elements function in relationship to each other. That helps us to understand how a complete plot works. We're going to use the model called Freytag's pyramid, and you can see here the baseline of that model, and we're going to map the terms onto it. That helps us see those pieces of the plot in relationship to each other. The first term is the exposition. This is the status quo, the normal state of affairs at the beginning of a story. You want to think about that. It doesn't have to be the chronologically first thing that happens in terms of the overall timeline of the story, but it's the first thing that you as the reader are exposed to by the narrator when you enter the story. So sometimes if you're starting in the middle, that in medias res, that other term from our unit, sometimes if you're starting in the middle, you have to do a little bit of detective work to understand that exposition in relation to the overall story. And sometimes it starts at a place that's pretty easy to understand as the chronological as well as actual beginning of the story itself. So either way, whether it's the chronological first thing that happens or the opening part of the story, it's going to be the first thing that is revealed and told in the narrative. Now, the inciting incident is the thing that happens that forces some change away from that status quo of the exposition. Something about this incident causes the plot to launch and begin to change that status quo. It launches into the rising action. The rising action is basically all those things that happen between that original status quo, the exposition, and the climax. And sometimes, and in fact often, there's quite a lot of narrative energy in the rising action. And we'll talk about that in a second. The climax, you're probably familiar with this term from other contexts, but it's a turning point in a text. Now, it is very possible for a text to have multiple turning points. So there can be some subclimaxes along the way. There can even be subclimaxes after the primary climax. But when you're identifying the primary climax, what you want to think about is that point of no return. You can never go back to the way things were in the exposition after this turning point. So that's a good way of thinking about the climax and helping you to understand and identify that correctly. After the climax, you get the falling action, and as I said, you can have subclimaxes in that part of the narrative as well. Sometimes the falling action is quite brief, and the falling action then ends with, and the story itself ends with a resolution or conclusion. Either one of those terms is fine. So that's the basic elements of the plot and how they're related to each other. When you're actually trying to identify these, sometimes it's easiest to find the inciting incident and the climax first, and then sort of think about the other pieces around it, right? So the rising action and falling action especially, the boundaries of those parts of the plot can be a little bit hard to detect if you're looking just for that. But if you identify the inciting incident and climax, then it's pretty easy to see, for example, where that rising action goes. The exposition too, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see the boundary of that. But if you identify that clear inciting incident, then that helps you to see where the exposition starts and ends. And you can have a pretty lengthy exposition in some narratives. That's very possible. Okay, so those are the basic terms. As you can see here, it's set up in this real, very clear isosceles triangle. That is not how real plots look. So in an actual plot, the shape is going to be a lot messier and more complicated. I have just one example here. This shows a story where there's a pretty long exposition. That rising action is actually a little bit briefer, and it has a pretty long falling action, including a subclimax before the final resolution. So this is just one type of visualization. A little bit later in the unit, you're going to create your own plot visualization of one of the stories we're going to read. So just keep that in mind, and mapping these out, looking at this in a visual way really can help you to see some different things about the plot and help you to analyze how that story is structured. So let's do an example. Here's just a quick little comic strip. You can take a minute to read this over. And then let's see how we can map the parts of the plot onto this example. Now keep in mind, because this is such a brief example, it's going to compress some of those individual pieces that we're looking at. But let's go through this and see how this might work. So let's take a look at this first pane. This is definitely our exposition, and the exposition is communicated mainly visually in this particular medium. So you see a guy in waders out in a river with a fishing rod. That's really the exposition, is this idea of what's happening, the situation that, okay, there's a guy out fishing. The "got a minute, Dad" dialogue is a moment of that inciting incident, like that's what's going to launch things, is the question that's going to start the conversation between the two characters. Now we don't see the dad, we just get the bubble, so he's somewhere off stage, so to speak. In the next few panes, this is our rising action here. So we had exposition, inciting incident in the first panel, and then these next few panels, that's our rising action. And it's the son explaining his band has a cash flow problem, the dad, "I'm listening." And then he talks about the sponsorships. Wow, that's cool. So it seems, and again, I'm not familiar with if they're running characters in this strip, but it seems that the dad is the actual fish. And I'm sure that there's probably a pun there on bass drum, using, you know, bass, right? So I'm pretty sure that's the pun that's going on there, and it's probably meant to be funny that the dad is a fish. Makes me think of Faulkner, but never mind. You can ask me about that later. And so there you have it. That's sort of the getting us through the rising action. The climax here, the turning point, is the line snaps and the fish goes back in the water. So that's the point of no return here. He's not going to be able to get back to just fishing. The line is broken, so no more fishing for you. And then his friend at the end asked him, "How did it go?" And here's the resolution: "I had him hooked, but I couldn't land him." And again, that's meant to be a word play. A little more literal than you would expect in some cases, because that's actually a very figurative way of talking about this. But in this case, it's literal, because apparently his father is a fish. And so, you know, that it's like ba-dum-bum. And that's the resolution, is that he is unsuccessful in getting the money from his dad. So that's just a brief example. Hopefully that helps to illustrate those pieces of the plot and how we can map those out. And then there's just a couple of final terms that I want to mention, and that is pace. So pace is what describes that idea that we talked about of, are you putting a lot of narrative energy, for example, in the rising action? You know, what is the speed with which things are related? So that's pacing. Pacing is the feel of time as you're going through that plot. And I mean that in the sense of not just like literally like, oh, and you know, then a week passed and something happened. That can be part of it, but also that idea of how much actual space in the narrative, how much description is being devoted to this, how much explanation is given to certain things that are happening. Those explanations can be used to speed up and slow down a plot, and so those things are what contribute to pace. And then finally, discriminated occasion. When you have one of those moments where the plot does slow down and there's a lot of description surrounding a certain event, that can be called a discriminated occasion, and it's meant to draw attention to itself. Oftentimes that's an important part of the plot. It might be a moment of foreshadowing. It could even be something like the climax itself. It doesn't have to be, but it's possible. So discriminated occasion is when the pacing is deliberately slowed down in order to emphasize a certain element of the plot. So that gives us a sense of some of the key terms that we want to start with as we're talking about plots, and especially those structural elements of the plot that can help you understand the organization of a narrative.